Spoiler warning! Spoiler warning! Spoiler warning! Ah!
Welcome back everyone, and it's time to go balls deep! Today we are covering the lore of the League of Villains to prep for the upcoming arc in My Hero Academia Season 5 called My Villain Academia. This is one of the best arcs in the My Hero Academia manga, so we thought this is the best time to cover the League of Villains for you guys as they take the spotlight soon. We will be explaining the members of the League of Villains so that you can understand it better and refresh your memories on what exactly is going on. But before I dive any deeper, I need to mention a great game you need to play. I would like to talk about Atelier Alchemist of Versailles. This game reminds me of the days of enjoying RPGs such as Final Fantasy. The graphics slap, the gameplay and aesthetics are top tier for a mobile game, and the gameplay is damn right addictive. Mwah! Yeah, baby! The Atelier series is coming to mobile. It's a free-to-play adventure role-playing game that combines the features of the previous Atelier series with online play and cooperation mode with up to 3 friends. So if you do have friends, you can have even more fun. RIP to those that don't have any friends. My bad.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
But I'm kidding. Seriously, the download link will be in the pinned comment and description. If you find yourselves bored on the train, at home, or on the plane, minding your own business, give this game a try and see how you can explore the world with characters such as Rorana and Marie from the previous Atelier series and a never seen before story. Nani? You start the journey as protagonists, starting at the Royal Academy and continue around the world to become the best alchemists. The specialization in alchemy is about finding, collecting and combining items and recipes to create better items to advance further in the game and pave your own path with your favorite waifu. You know what I'm saying. You can customize your characters completely, where you can try different gear such as clothes, weapons and accessories to improve your stats, change your appearance and get new skills. Download the game on Android and iOS with the link in the description and pinned comment. If you use the code down below, you will get special gifts for free, exclusively, that will expire soon. You can get ether and EXP potions. Alright, let's get back to the video. So what is the League of Villains? As we all know, the League of Villains has been around in the story of My Hero Academia since the beginning, having them going throughout the world of My Hero Academia in a parallel fashion to that of Deku and the other UA students. The League is an organization created by All For One, made up of villains he deemed powerful enough and helpful enough to his cause, which is, you know, ultimately to destroy the hero society and to become a dictator. All For One gives Tomura Shigaraki the position as leader of this group, but they eventually expand into a larger group called the Paranormal Liberation Front. This is after they merge with the Meta Liberation Army in the aftermath of the My Villain Academia arc. Basically, the League of Villains has expanded much beyond their introduction in the U.S.J arc, but our focus of this video isn't an in-depth history lesson, but more like a highlight of every character's backstory and what powers they possess. As I said earlier, the big bad All For One is the creator of the League of Villains and has been overseeing all of its strategic actions from afar. In fact, he may be the actual leader because he is trying to take over Shigaraki's body. He knows everything about everyone and has been doing this afar with his multiple quirks. He has the quirk All For One, hence his name of course, and he's the creator of One For All, the 2 most overpowered quirks in the series. The All For One quirk gives the user the ability to steal the quirks of other people whilst also using them as their own, all done with a simple touch. The user can also give these stolen quirks to other people as well as pass on the All For One quirk itself, and when this happens, the new user gains a mental link with the previous user, very reminiscent of Deku's connection with the previous previous One For All users. This is because every quirk in My Hero Academia has a quirk factor, which holds your DNA, and therefore this is why All For One is so powerful in his tyranny, as when he's giving away these quirks or has taken away other people's quirks, he subconsciously can control things, as the quirks do hold a part of your consciousness. All For One is the original Shigaraki, giving Tomura his namesake when he took him under his wing. However, in his prime, All For One was the most powerful villain in Japan due to his overpowered quirk and of course the manipulation of people. When quirks started coming into the world around 150 years ago, Japan struggled to adjust, and this caused an age of upheaval to occur. This is when All For One started using his quirk to steal other people's, whilst also bestowing quirk onto others. For people who were mutated or hated their quirks, All For One would take them away and give them salvation and a better life. This was in order to make them feel indebted to him by doing what he considered a favor, thus raising his reputation and influence among people. He would sometimes give these quirks to other people and groom them into his personal assistants. League members like Gigantomachia are examples of this, but we will cover him later on in the video. All For One continued his plot for domination by planning to pass his quirk on to his younger brother Yoichi, but he opposed his evil ways. Seeing through his false good, Yoichi tried to rebel against his brother, but he was quirkless, so he was easily defeated by All For One's bodyguards and was imprisoned. Soon after, All For One decided to force a stockpile quirk onto his brother Yoichi in order to force him to submit. This backfires though, because Yoichi had an unknown quirk that could only be transferred to others, causing the stockpile quirk and the unknown transfer quirk to combine to form One For All, the ability that will be used to defy All For One for years to come. It's the one and only quirk that is destined to go against All For One's tyranny and his entire plan. This is because it also has a subconscious realm. One For All is the only quirk that he cannot steal and is powerful enough to destroy him, as long as the user of the quirk has a strong enough will to go against his quirk that steals your power. Now fast forward after generations of battles with 8 users of One For All For One finds the grandchild of the 7th One For All user named Shimura and raises him, that being the character we know as Tomura Shigaraki. He has been completely manipulated. Due to the return of All Might after the death and sacrifice of Shimura, All For One begins to take major losses. All Might starts to dismantle All For One's criminal empire bit by bit, forming his title of the Symbol of Peace. Sensing a looming defeat, All For One took certain measures into play, such as sending off Gigantomachia into hiding secretly. But most importantly, All For One duplicated his own quirk, giving the Dr. Garaki guy, you know, Dr. Saab, Banchot, he gave him an opportunity to experiment with it. The true goal for All For One, however, was ultimately to pass the quirk onto Tomura Shigaraki, creating a new legacy. Eventually, a major battle between All Might and All For One broke out. Both fighters sustained big blows, causing All Might's legacy as a user to begin to fade, whilst All For One hides to heal from his wounds. This is when All Might got the injury and his respiratory, I can't say the word, guys. This is when All Might got his injury and he displayed it to Deku in chapter 1. Now in this time period, the beginning of Tomura's grooming to be the successor began. After Deku received the One For All quirk from All Might to become its 9th user, All For One turned his attention to him, leading a breakout mission into Tartarus, releasing all of the locked up villains and making them his assassins to go after Deku, which was all part of his grand scheme to break Deku both mentally and physically by making Deku feel the weight of everything on his shoulders, sending him down a dark and lonely path to break his will. With this in mind, the League of Villains was created as a front to All For One's ultimate goal and as a medium for Shigaraki to grow and manipulate the world. In chapter 316, at this point in the manga, we see another side to All For One, as with this interaction with Deku, it seems as though he is trying trying to reason with him, giving his perspective. All for One for now sees Deku as his direct rival. Deku leveled up to the point of being worthy for a dialogue. He goes on to tell Deku that he did not force Lady Nagant to do what she was doing, rather it was her decision to fight him and try to assassinate, repeating the same rhetoric he did with his brother we see in chapter 193. He gives a choice to his followers, helping them in their problems. In return, they stay loyal to him, later protecting his goals. All for One states in chapter 316 how the people who fall are the ones who are labeled as villains, as the failures of society who do not conform to the norm or have moments of mental weakness are shamed instead of given a support system. He mentions how there is no such meaning behind taking pride in your individualism and quirks, as at the end of the day, we live in a controlled society, and if you do not fit in, then you will be excluded and put as an outcast, eventually being led to feel ostracized, developing mental anxieties and disorders. This exclusion brings rise to the villains the heroes are set to fight and ultimately oppress. All for One adds that this system is instilled with the nature of us humans. Regardless of quirks, there are no exceptions. It doesn't matter if we live in a democracy or a dictatorship, the origin is all the same. All for One stating that this was an issue even before the first traces of society emerged, goes on to show how much he studied human behavior, separating his own emotions from it, and deduced the perpetual cycle of hatred that forms from discarding the misfits, abnormal and weird from society. Fundamentally, this means that being unique is a problem if it goes outside of the boundary that determines what the limits of the uniqueness is. This also goes back to the concept of quirks, as the name itself implies a peculiar aspect of a person's character or behavior. All for One understood that no matter how we look at the world, no matter what, humans will never come to unconditionally accept everyone for who they are or want to be. So in the end, order and acceptance is a facade to him, leaving All for One to believe that chaos is the answer, taking us back to chapter 193, where he told his brother that the chaos he is creating will end up bringing true order. Now, we cover My Hero Academia on a weekly basis. If you are still confused regarding what the hell am I talking about, what are you talking about, Deku getting lonely, going down a dark path, what is going on? All for One wants to steal One for All and break Deku's will? I'm confused.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Well, we cover My Hero Academia on a weekly basis. The manga is absolutely flames right now, and I want you to hit the notification bell for the channel right now, smash the like button and support us. Trust me, you won't regret it. We cover it balls deep style in complete detail. Join the community. So let's move on to Shigaraki, the successor of All for One and the current leader of the League of Villains. Tomura Shigaraki was formerly known as Tenko Shimura. This is before he was adopted by the strongest villain to exist in the world, a powerful force in the modern villain society. Shigaraki was born in the family of the 7th One for All user Nana Shimura. Tenko's parents were Nao Shimura and Kotaro Shimura, with an older sister named Hana Shimura. When Tenko was a child, he had a fascination with heroes. He actually wanted to be a hero like Deku did. Just as Deku sees All Might as a symbol of peace and idolized him, Shigaraki idolized his grandmother and wanted to be like her. But his father did not tolerate him acting like a hero and would send him outside for punishment and even doing physical abuse. As a child, it was unclear if he had a quirk, but he had a physical change where he suffered from which were unknown to the family. But this didn't stop his mother and grandmother from supporting him. On top of that, this condition was that he always felt itchy and would scratch himself. His sister Hana even showed him pictures of their grandmother Nana Shimura to indulge in his love for heroes. Unfortunately, their father finds out about this and punishes Shigaraki, where he rants about how heroes abandon their families. He is projecting his own insecurities about his own mother Nana Shimura, where she abandoned all of them to save society using One for All against All for One. Nana deeply regrets gets this later in the manga, as she knew she was part of the problem and why Shigaraki turned out the way he did, because the cycle of hatred continues where their father actually ends up abusing the grandson due to the feelings he had about her. While Shigaraki's father will do these terrible actions to him, the other family members watched. It was this negligence that pushed Tenko over the edge, crying and holding his dog, expressing how much he hated his family. Why is no one helping him? Why are heroes not doing anything? Everyone is fake. This is when Tenko's quirk Decay activates, causing his dog to break down into pieces whilst within his arms. The quirk Decay disintegrates whatever Tenko touches with all 5 fingers, and it doesn't matter if the object he is touching is organic or not. It also disintegrates very quickly, and he can even spread it beyond what he touches, giving him the ability to hit multiple groups of enemies at once over a large surface area. The initial use of Decay was primarily out of Tenko's sadness and hate for the situation he was facing at the time, causing him to use the quirk on accident. This panic situation and confusion is ultimately what put Tenko on the path to become Shigaraki. Soon after, Hana, his sister, comes outside to apologize for not helping him and lying to their father, but instead she tries to run away in horror after seeing what he did to their dog. Tenko wants to explain himself, but tragically this fails and he reaches out to her, disintegrating his own sister. This is a repeated process as his mother and grandparents come running outside to see what was happening, leading Tenko to also use Decay on them instantly due to his panic from killing Hana. Now this is where the difference comes in. When Shigaraki's father came to face him, he grabbed a garden tool, scared of what his son would do. So this is what enraged Tenko, because he's not loving, he's not caring about his own son, instead he's scared of him and wants to discipline him again. Tenko, with his own feelings, he was first scared of what he did, but now the difference is with his father, he admits to himself in his inner monologue he had the full intent to kill him. He wanted to kill his own dad, and he succeeds in doing so, leaving him to fend for himself on the streets. He ended up becoming an orphan. Even on the streets as a child and an orphan, Tenko received no help because people assumed a hero would handle it. With no one coming to help Tenko, he was left crying under a bridge until his new papa, All For One, came to save him and show him a place where he can belong. All For One used this terrible past that he himself manipulated to build on Tenko's hatred for heroes and hero society, bestowing him the name Tomura Shigaraki, the successor of All For One's quirk. Now the reason All For One manipulated Tenko to become Shigaraki is because he needs his hatred and his will to combine with his own to overtake Deku's will, and therefore allow him to eventually overpower and steal One For All. This is the only way he can do it, by making Shigaraki hate these people so much. Now during this adoption, Shigaraki suppresses the memories of his family over time, replacing them with the new life All For One had given him. Eventually these memories return when facing the Liberation Army, specifically during his fight with Redestro. Shigaraki was treated terribly by his father, and because of his father's hatred for heroes, if heroes never let his father down, if Nana never made Shigi's father feel despair, then all his pain could have been avoided. If heroes were truly heroes, then they would have been there to save him from his parents, right? If they couldn't do that, they would have at least come to help him after he was trying to find a new home and control his power. But even then, they didn't. All For One took advantage of this and even told him, go kill the people that bullied you. Technically speaking, All For One was the only one that was there for him, opening the door to be free to mark the world and change it as he sees fit. That is what the League of Villains embodies for Shigaraki, the upheaval of the hero society by destroying the symbols that keep the faulty system of heroes going, the heroes themselves. Fast forward, after multiple clashes with the UA students, Shigaraki is facing the internal and external conflicts that will ultimately decide his future. Specifically, the events of My Villain Academia are huge because he goes plus ultra when up against the Liberation Front. It is during his battle with Redestro where the Decay quirk experiences a reawakening within Shigaraki. Essentially, Shigaraki unlocks a new effectiveness of his quirk, giving him the ability to expand the reach of his Decay so that he no longer needs all 5 fingers. Shigaraki shows himself doing this when he partially damaged Redestro's giant pointer after getting 2 of his fingers destroyed. It is important to note though that the decay is much slower than when he uses all 5 fingers, it gets to a point that Shigaraki can decay things that touch objects already being decayed, which is absolutely busted. Shigaraki's prowess had been suddenly enhanced to levels beyond his natural parameters. According to Redestro, if Shigaraki had his newly increased physical parameters during the Camino incident, he would have easily taken out at least 1 or 2 of the pro heroes during that event, even without his decay quirk. After a fierce battle with him, he was not only able to defeat Redestro to gain control of his army, but also tame a triple S villain known as Gigantomachia with his accomplishment. This grand awakening from Shigaraki not only makes him much more powerful, but also shows the understanding he has of his quirk, indirectly expressing his mentality growing as well and maturing. Shigaraki's will for destruction had expanded just like his quirk decay capabilities, making him an even more mental threat to the hero society as he falls deeper into the succession plan All For One had for him. Look at his bloody quirk, he destroys an entire city, fam! And this isn't even the end of it, because later on in the manga, All For One's doctor ends up doing experiments on Shigaraki's body. This is because he wants to take him over and gain a body that can withhold all his power and quirks. This experiment was so insane that Tomura Shigaraki becomes way too OP. After the surgery, Tomura's natural physical strength was augmented by several levels, allowing him to move freely in the air with only his arm movements, similar to All Might. Endeavor went so far as to compare Shigaraki's strength to All Might, though Dr. Garaki stated that Tomura's strength is not quite on par with him, since any further remodeling of his body would have overburdened his mind. Now this is only when he's at 70%. Currently in the latest chapters, All For One is waiting for Tomura Shigaraki to reach 100%. After the surgery, when we look at Tomura's speed, it was also significantly enhanced by the surgery, allowing him to outmaneuver Endeavor and move across Jaku City in very little time. He was able to outpace several other heroes and catch up to Deku and Bakugo at the same time. When pushing his body past its limits, his speed increases even more, managing to catch up to Gran Torino, one of the fastest heroes in the entire world, and he also impales his chest before he could even react. When we look at his durability, the modifications to Shigaraki's body significantly increase its durability, allowing him to withstand Endeavor's strongest attack point blank range, fam. Shigaraki was also able to take the AP machine gun from Bakugo and calling it mere fireworks. But that's not all, guys. After all of that, he was also able to tank Deku's 100% one for all repeated succession. This means multiple 100% punches from Deku, whilst Aizawa had his quirks erased. He is completely busted and OP after the surgery. Next up on the list is Kurogiri, the initial right hand to Shigaraki, also the protector of him assigned by All For One. Kurogiri does not play a direct role in the event of My Villain Academia, but he is still a key player due to his role of releasing Gigantomachia, who was a crucial wild card hidden by All For One so that Shigaraki could grow further as a leader of a villainous uprising. Specifically, Kurogiri is a Nomu created by Dr. Garaki from the corpse of Oboro Shirakumo. Well, I butchered that, sorry guys. Please forgive me. This backstory is expanded upon in the My Hero Academia spin-off Vigilante, where it's a tragic story connecting Kurogiri to Aizawa, aka Eraserhead. Obora Shirakumo had the quirk ability called Cloud, which granted him the ability to generate clouds, of course. These clouds are dense enough to be touched and can carry a relatively large amount of weight, even being able to store objects, which is the base factor for Kurogiri's quirk called Warp Gate. Obora Shirakumo was a student in class 2A at UA high school training to become a pro hero. He was in the same class as Shoto Aizawa and Hisashi Yamada. He was killed during a battle with a villain during his hero work studies. Now Warp Gate is a man-made quirk combining the cloud quirk with several other ones. The actual quirk ability allows Kurogiri to create and manipulate a dark fog from his head and hands. This fog acts as a portal to another location, as when he produces a mass of the dark fog, it transports anything it comes in contact with to a location of Kurogiri's choosing. Kurogiri's quirk is coordinate based, so in order to use it, he needs to know the exact location where he is supposed to open the exit portal. This quirk was used crucially in multiple arcs, such as the attack on U.A. trading camp arc and the hideout raid arc. It is in the overhaul arc, Kurogiri's role as Shigaraki's protector comes to an end, once he is captured by Gran Torino and sent to Tartarus. Now with All For One also held captive in Tartarus, Kurogiri begins to uncover the cards All For One had set aside for preparation when he is captured. However, after the events of chapter 297 and the attack on Tartarus, the chances are that we could see Kurogiri's role in the story become more prominent once again.
So as Adil pointed out, Gigantomachia, being All For One's former bodyguard, technically makes him one of the first legal villain member, coming before Shigaraki himself. This monstrous servant was lying in wait for a time that he would be led once again by his new master, that being Shigaraki, once he fully realized his ambitions. Now all that is really known about Gigantomachia is that he once worked for All For One and has heavy loyalty to his cause. We have yet to get any other information on his origins. It is more likely that he was given a quirk by All For One or saved by him in some ways to gain his admiration and respect. But as we know from Dr. Saab in chapter 283, Gigantomachia is also the basis for the Nomus, and this does make a lot of sense considering Gigantomachia possesses 7 known quirks like that of a high-end Nomus. These 7 quirks are endurance, pain blocking, giantification, dog, energy efficiency, tough muscles, and mole. Now let me get into these quirks individually. The endurance quirk is basically Gigantomachia's original quirk, which allows him to convert his morale into physical energy and stamina. Literally, his willpower makes him stronger. The more emotions he feels in a fight, the stronger he becomes. Pain blocking comes next, which obviously by the name, you could tell that it means he's unable to detect any pain. You guys can read more about this in chapter 279. Now the next one is the obvious giantification, which allows the bones in Gigantomachia's body, such as his fingers and teeth, to grow to exponential lengths when agitated to increase his defense and attack power. Now potentially as a side effect, his flesh seems to protrude unnaturally, looking jarring at times. But this quirk works similarly to Mount Ladies, aside from a few differences here and there. The next quirk we have is Dog, which provides Gigantomachia with a keen sense of smell and sight, just like that of a hound dog. Then we have Energy Efficiency, which allows Gigantomachia's body to be able to conserve nutrients and water, allowing him to process without much sleep, making him like a living machine. Dang man, if you guys thought he's already broken, wait, we got more. There's Tough Muscle, which allows Gigantomachia's muscle to harden to ridiculous levels. This again increases his defense power above reason. Then we have his Mole, which allows Gigantomachia to grow mole-like claws from his fingers to help him dig through the earth, as well as tear through obstacles such as buildings. Now Gigantomachia may have many other quirks, but by now you guys should kind of have the awareness for Gigantomachia's arsenal of quirks and understand that Gigantomachia is an extremely powerful player within the league, which made his retrieval extremely important. After being found by Kurogiri, Gigantomachia goes into battle with Gran Torino and the other heroes, causing major destruction plus forcing the heroes to retreat as they were able to arrest Kurogiri. But that didn't really matter much, as Gigantomachia being the main target for Kurogiri allowed Shigaraki's growth to continue. At some point after this, Gigantomachia meets Shigaraki and the others. However, even though Shigaraki seemed excited realizing Gigantomachia was the power that Kurogiri went after, this excitement didn't last long once he learned that Gigantomachia wouldn't really do Shigaraki's bidding without any question. He had to prove himself. Gigantomachia is a monster who needs a powerful master to serve, so he demands a fight with the League to see their worth. But as Gigantomachia absolutely demolishes Himeko twice and Mr. Compress, he cries out in disappointment as how weak Shigaraki is. This disappointment even brought him to the point that he questions what All For One truly had planned for them. After this terrible confrontation, Shigaraki has a tantrum claiming he didn't want Gigantomachia anymore due to being loyal to All For One to a fault. Basically, he had to face the fact that he's garbage.
Know your fucking place, trash.
So Dr. Garaki-sab had to convince Shigaraki that Gigantomachia could still be very useful to him if he could be tamed, being an indispensable asset. It isn't until Gigantomachia witnesses Shigaraki's quirk awakening that he cries in acceptance, seeing the young prodigy obliterate half of Daika City whilst forcing Redestro to submit to him. Having Gigantomachia on the League side is like having an army or two. If you think about it, during the fight against the League, Gigantomachia was able to take on Shigaraki, Dabi, Himiko, Spinner and Mr. Compress with ease and defeated them repeatedly. This battle went on for over a month, where Gigantomachia attacked Shigaraki for over 44 hours and 44 minutes at a time, whilst only resting for 3 hours. Gigantomachia's enhanced senses made it impossible for Shigaraki to hide or pretty much do anything against it. And it's not that Shigaraki is weak, it's just that this dude is a monster. And if you do come to his strength, Gigantomachia can easily destroy many buildings, if not an entire city by himself. Let's not forget his crazy input during the war. He was able to constantly tank every attack that was given to him and also take on the gigantic mountain lady and toss her aside like she's just a piece of rag doll. And being so big as he is, it doesn't take away anything from his speed, as in chapter 288 it was recorded that Gigantomachia was able to go up to 100 kilometers per hour, which is approximately 62 miles per hour. That's freaking fast, guys. That's nearly as fast as a cheetah, which can run up to 130 kilometers per hour. And even though we don't know Gigantomachia's weight, by this we can kind of get a rough idea on the force that's applied by being hit by such a monster. And again, this force is illustrated in chapter 288 with the buildings literally falling apart like paper every time it grazes Gigantomachia. Now, I can try to power scale Gigantomachia, but after researching everything, it's clear that Gigantomachia is possibly the strongest physical being in the whole of My Hero Academia. It's likely that his power is on par, if not greater than All Might's. Okay, with that we move on to Dr. Sab himself, the secret weapon of All for One. Dr. Kyudai Garaki is the core experimenter who could be accredited to the creation of the Nomus, Kurogiri, and the one to power up Gigantomachia. This doctor, who's also known by his alias Daruma Ujiko, was hidden by All for One for years. But either way, Dr. Garaki is very important to the League's operation. Being around 120 years old, he is able to retain a more youthful appearance because of his quirk ability, Life Force, giving him longevity in his life. The downside to this quirk is that it affects the user's mobility over time. But in chapter 270, we learn that Dr. Garaki offered his quirk to All for One, and the quirk that he has at the moment is just a duplicate of the original one. Now, we don't really know the difference between the original and the duplicate. Maybe there's more side effects for the duplicate or it doesn't work as well, but Dr. Garaki's loyalty does have some basis, as it was around 70 years ago when the doctor theorized the quirk singularity, the concept that quirks over generations would become stronger and stronger to the point of being uncontrollable. This is because that even though the quirk itself is evolving, the human body is not evolving fast enough to keep up. Society, however, dismissed this theory, perceiving it as the doomsday conspiracy. Being blackballed and seen as a nut job by society and his peers made Dr. Garaki ostracized from society to the point that he went into hiding and disappeared. This is when All for One approached him, entirely believing his theory. All for One, with his ability to use many quirks, had the idea that his body was not able to adapt, being very detrimental to him. So All for One offered his help to the doctor in his research and investigation, all in order to find a solution. In the process, the idea of creating Nomus came to be. Dr. Garaki eventually became the one to modify Shigaraki's family's hands to be used as his villain costume, as well as becoming All for One's physician after his critical injuries. Dr. Sab led multiple experiments with the Nomus, testing multiple quirk factors to create the best weapon to be used for the League. The doctor even considered Nomus his children, quite like Dr. Frankenstein and his monster. And on that note, let's quickly go over these Nomus, who are artificial humans that ranges in their mental capacity and quirk strength created from corpse of people. The word Nomu itself in Japanese means brainless, pretty accurate and straightforward to what they were when they were initially introduced in the series. There are completely sentient Nomus like the previously mentioned Kurogiri, and then also ignorant Nomus like the first one introduced in the raid on UA arc. Each of these Nomus are given multiple quirks to be super soldiers of the League in order to kill powerful heroes like All Might. There are multiple hidden labs where the Nomus are being made, and these Nomus are broken down into multiple tiers: lower tier, middle tier, upper tier, near high end, and high end. These ranks are distinguished based on the physical boost plus number of quirks within them. The lower tier Nomus serve as foot soldiers and mindless fighting machines. They actually have enough power to take down weaker pro heroes, but struggle on more experienced ones. Now, the only difference between lower tier and middle tier is that the minor strength increases and the color of their skin. The same type of quirk have been used, as well as quirks like Tool Arm and an unnamed mutation quirk that has allowed one to fly. Now, the upper tier Nomus are well able to fight against the top pro heroes, usually colored black, possessing the super regeneration quirk and sometimes shock absorption. Dr. Garaki says these Nomus are at least as strong as 10 average pro heroes combined. We then come to the near high ends, the incomplete form of the strongest Nomu type, which are creatures that are as powerful as the high ends, with the only difference between them being the fact that they are yet to develop the ability to think for themselves, which brings us to the actual high end Nomus. These Nomu truly are league above the rest, being a major threat to even the strongest of heroes. These Nomus have up to 6 quirks whilst having the ability to think intellectually and retain the original personality, which is the source of their terror. Even the hooded Nomu who fought Endeavor displayed the ability to understand his quirk in order to exploit Endeavor's limits and weaknesses. Another example is the woman Nomu who realized Eraserhead's quirk ability, then instantly maneuvered out of his line of sight to counter it. That being said, without All For One, the process to create them is now much more difficult. What really makes their creation twisted is that Dr. Garaki purposely chooses powerful and twisted villains as the canvas. These chosen corpses then have to be modified and then prepped to get their quirks transplanted through surgery, which requires at least 3 months to stabilize. The known quirks they have possessed are shoulder mounted jets, power transforming arms, super regeneration, liquefaction and rapture. The only Nomu shown to be above the high end is of course Kurogiri, due to how superior his intelligence is when compared to the others.
Moving on, however, we have the Vanguard Action Squad. This was a group of 10 villains that completed offensive missions for the League, but the only important ones are Dabi, Twice, Himoko Toga, Dr. Compress and Spinner, eventually going on to surpass these roles once the League disbands. It was a group formed to attack the UA students and capture Bakugo in the Forest Training Arc before the League combined with the Liberation Army to become the Paranormal Liberation Front. The members mentioned are the ones who fight during the events of MVA and beyond, so we'll be focusing on them today. Dabi, originally Toyo Todoroki, the older brother of Shoto, is one of the leading villains in the League of Villains. He is currently the commander for the Vanguard Action Guerrilla Warfare Regiment Violet. Dabi's quirk is Chromation, giving him the ability to create highly destructive blue flames out of his body. Due to his mother being an ice quirk user, Dabi has a natural weakness to fire and heat, making his own ability damaging to his skin, hence the burns and scars we see all over his body. His flames are naturally stronger than his father's Hellflame quirk, and when Dabi feels strong emotions, his fire burns even hotter, giving him massive destructive potential. Dabi joined the League of Villains after seeing Stain become such a prominent figure in the hero society, expressing that he had personal disdain for the hero world and that he plans to make Stain's world a reality. This becomes more clear in the recent war arc between UA and the Paranormal Liberation Front, when Dabi reveals to the world his true identity, being the oldest son of Enji Todoroki, aka the current #1 hero, Endeavor. Dabi reveals the truth behind his childhood death, giving the backstory to Endeavor betraying his trust as a mentor and a father. Being born with such a powerful quirk, Endeavor had engraved in Dabi, or Toya at the time, that he could become even more powerful than All Might. This turns out to be untrue due to the complications with Toya's body, which ultimately led to the birth of Shoto, the perfect combination of fire and ice. After finding out about his inferiority, Toya is consumed with the desire to prove his worth to his father, even attacking Shoto as a baby after noticing he was all Endeavor paid attention to.
Hey yo, what the
After years of being told he could become a hero, it became impossible for Toyo to believe he was incapable of achieving it, especially since Endeavor was his father. Toyo became close with his siblings, aside from Shoto, who was raised separately. Eventually, the abuse, neglect, heartache and anxiety build up from life with Endeavor, pushing Toyo to the edge, causing him to try and confine Natsuo one night, complaining about Endeavor's action, and even calling out the morality of heroes. Natsuo brushes this conversation off, which Toya takes as a sign that Natsuo does not support him. Eventually, Toya learns how emotions make his flames stronger, exploring this at Sakoto Park. Learning this, Toya tells Endeavor excited his belief in becoming stronger has shown in results. However, Endeavor then sees more burn marks on Toya, then frustratingly yelling at him for still training. Endeavor takes this out on Rei, Toya's mother. However, Toya goes back to Sakoto Park again to meet Endeavor, who never shows up. In the disappointment and turmoil, Toya loses all control of his flames, creating a giant wildfire exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, which is almost double the temperature of lava. God damn! It is due to this that Dabi has all the scars and stitches on his body. In fact, the only thing found was his jawbone, making his family believe that he had died. But we know he survived, living on as Dabi, living his new life as a villain plotting to destroy Endeavor and the Hero Society. Moving on to Jin Bubaigawa, more commonly known as Twice. Twice is a fan favourite villain as well as being a major player in the League of Villains, as his powers could potentially single-handedly take down an entire nation. That is how dangerous he is. However, he didn't start out being this powerful. Twice's double-sided personality at the start is a result of his existential crisis, not knowing whether or not he was the real Jin due to an event in his past which I will touch upon in a minute. This is why when we first meet him, he speaks in a contradictory manner, where he would say one thing but then contradict that in the very same sentence. You see, Jin had a very unfortunate life, as he lost his parents to a villain in middle school, becoming an orphan. But whenever life looked up for him, finding a job, having access to food and shelter, he lost it all. Thanks to a series of unfortunate coincidences, Jin finds himself without a home and a job, and worst of all, he finds himself lonely. This is when he uses his quirk, Double, to combat his loneliness. How Double works is he can create a copy of anything, two at a time, through touch. Jin can also produce replicas of anyone, which can be greatly beneficial to provide support in numbers. In order to conceive a perfect clone, Jin required the knowledge of precise measurements and physical features of the person or object he is replicating. If he is copying a person, even their personalities would be the same, making it almost impossible to tell the difference between the two. There is a paradoxical effect with Double in this regard, because it even copies quirks, allowing Jin's clones to make clones, theoretically being able to make an infinite number of clones. However, Double is also a double-edged sword, and is the reason for Jin's unstable mental state. He started using his clones to dive into crime while also forcing his copies to do his bidding, but the sharing of personalities led to a major clash, causing fake Jins to feel as though they were the real Jin. This causes them to fight for whoever they thought was the real Jin, where the Jin copies eventually started killing each other. Coincidentally, Jin is the last one standing, traumatized by seeing himself being killed over and over again by himself. It makes him too afraid to use his quirk on himself anymore, and is too afraid of knowing whether or not he is the real Jin. He takes on the name Twice and wears a mask, claiming that if he takes it off, he will split himself. In real life, what Jin suffers from can be identified as a dissociative identity disorder when he doesn't have his mask on. He also starts arguing with himself, but the mask makes him feel whole, which makes him act in a more neutral way about his contradictory manner. He was freed from the shackles of loneliness. When society wouldn't accept him, the League of Villains did, as despite his crazy personality, they took him in, they gave him purpose, and he finally found happiness, which made him determined to protect his newfound family. Twice originally used clones to compensate for his desire for friendship, but because of this deep desire to find friends, he trusts others far too easily, and is prone to betrayal far more than most. This is apparent with his relationship with characters such as Hawks. However, it isn't until the events of My Villain Academia where his determination is put to the test, where Twice witnesses his comrade Toga about to be killed. Tortured by Skeptic's clones and taking a lot of damage, he realizes that he is indeed the real Jin. All it took was a bit of damage to see if he was the real one or not, but he was too afraid to disappear. But with this knowledge in mind, it managed to heal a bit of Twice's trauma, and he finally dared to make clones of himself, setting aside his own existential crisis for the sake of the League of Villains. The power which he unlocked by overcoming his trauma was Infinite Double's Sad Man's Parade. Since his clones can also use the quirk double, he can create clones which can create more clones, and those clones continue, which create an exponential increase in clones, allowing for ridiculous numbers. This is the power which can overcome entire nations, and is exactly why Jin is the single most dangerous League of Villains member when it comes to war, as his ability will always, no matter the situation, outnumber his opponents by a significant amount. You see, Twice was really close to Hawks, who had joined the Paranormal Liberation Front as a spy, and thanks to Jin's trusting nature, he tells Hawks essential information about the plans of the villains, which leads to the raid of the Paranormal Liberation Front's hideouts. Once the raid had started, Hawks had already pinned down Twice. Considering how big of a threat he was, Hawks was originally planning to simply hand in Twice as a villain, but after getting close to Twice, he realised that he wasn't a bad person, but had only suffered at the hands of misfortune, and was willing to vouch for Jin so that he could start his life over. However, Jin was having none of it, since this betrayal came at the cost of him disrupting the plans of the League of Villains, his family. He felt guilty for being deadweight, that his trusting nature and his actions had led to the death of Magna when he brought Overhaul to the hideout. Jin no longer trusts Hawks, and is overcome by anger and fury for this betrayal. He doesn't care about himself at this point, and is sadly killed by Hawks in the encounter. However, his final thoughts were never that he had led an unfortunate life, but rather that he was happy to live the life he had lived, being with the friends who had accepted him for who he was before he could even accept himself for who he was. The clone of Jin got to spend the final moments with his friends, and not the real Jin, which goes to show it never mattered who was real or not, because in the end they were all Jin. Himiko Toga is probably one of the most standout members in the League of Villains, considering her twisted personality and showcasing of a very morbid view of love and friendship. This is due to Toga's quirk, where she can transform into anyone as long as she's consumed their blood. Wanting to torture someone and suck the blood from them is akin to kissing in her view, as a casual expression of love, as she thinks it's the way to learn about others since she wants to be the people she loves, hence her quirk Transform. Transform gives Toga the ability to change into another person and even use their voice. The more of that person's blood she drinks, the longer she can keep up the form. And she can also switch forms if she's ingested multiple people's blood. We learn in chapter 234 that quirks are actually born from a person's nature, something they have no control over. That's why people in the Society of My Hero Academia are shunned, since they don't fit in with the world's ideal of how society should function. However, Toga represents the idea that no matter the nature you possess when you're born, you should have the right to express yourself. And that with a society so wide in terms of individuality, there's bound to be people who can't conform to the ideals of society, leaving them to be the outcasts. Growing up, Toga's family were often disgusted by her obsession with blood and deeming anything gory to be cute. This makes them try to force her to be normal. This was something Toga hated very much, but it caused her to feel the need to change herself. It worked for some time, however that was until Toga witnessed a boy in school named Saito be beat up, making him bleed all over. This caused Toga to feel abnormal again, making her believe she had a crush on Saito. Later, she succumbs to her nature and tries to express her love for Saito and attacks him with a box cutter. It was at that point that Toga accepts her abnormalities, believing she has the right to love who she wants and be who she wants, since her conforming to the norms of society was just not going to happen thanks to her nature. After accepting who she is, Toga joins the League of Villains, where she begins her journey of truly finding herself, ultimately going on to be one of the 9 lieutenants of the Paranormal Liberation Front and the commander for the Vanguard Action Intelligence Regiment, Carmine. Despite her crazy facial expressions and morbid view on friendship and love, she's actually very compassionate, showing compassion to Twice and is visibly furious after he dies, as well as trying to take revenge on Overhaul because of Magna's death. Toga, similarly to Twice, was accepted into the League of Villains where they accepted her for who she really was and her tendencies. She had found a place to belong to when the rest of society had shunned her, which explains why she was so loving towards them. Toga's quirk makes her perfect for stealth operations, since she's able to infiltrate and act perfectly like the people she had disguised herself as, like we saw her do back during the provisional license exam arc when she disguised herself as Kami. However, despite her stealth-related purpose of the quirk, Toga still has combat ability as her quirk went through an awakening, similarly to many of the other members of the League of Villains during My Villain Academia. In the events of chapter 226, Toga unlocks her quirk awakening in battle with the Liberation Army member Curious and her soldiers through the fear of death. Her awakening allows her to not only replicate the external features of those whose blood she has consumed, but also utilise their quirks too if she has a sufficient understanding of that person's quirk, making her a very dangerous ally for the League. Following on from Toga though, we have Atsuhiro Sako, or as he's better known as Mr. Compress. He is the great-great-grandson of Oji Harama, a legendary criminal from the past who stole goods from false heroes, preaching reformation while giving to the poor like Robin Hood. Atsuhiro, being from a family of thieves, gave him a background of being raised to fight corruption and expose injustices. His reasoning for joining the League stems from this. His lineage is all about exposing sham heroes and delivering true justice to the world. His namesake, Mr. Compress, derives from his quirk name, allowing him to compress anything in a spherical area around his arm into a small marble-like object without actually damaging it. However, he can only compress his target if he is touching it. The weight of the target is reduced alongside them, making them very easy to carry. If used on a person, it effectively entraps them, as we saw with Bakugo and Tokiyami in the Forest training arc, effectively giving him the power to terminate a fight instantly and allowing Mr. Compress to abduct his target without any difficulty. The quirk can also be used on select body parts, removing limbs from a target, including himself, which seems to be a seemingly painless process. In fact, this is exactly what he did in chapter 294 to escape the clutches of Best Jeanist, as he compressed a portion of his torso and bought time for Spinner to wake Shigaraki up. Shuichi Iguchi, or as he's better known as Spinner, has the outer appearance of a lizard due to his quirk Gecko. All that is known about Gecko is that it bestows the lizard-like appearance and allows him to stick to walls like a gecko. It's pretty damn lame, to be honest, when you compare it to the others. That being said, what makes Spinner interesting is his past, facing much discrimination due to his appearance while receiving no help from any heroes, being labelled as a freak by society and even those he lived with, which caused him to feel empty. However, this all changed after he saw Stain's final stand on TV, causing him to join the League of Villains to make the world better. In fact, he looks up to Stain so much that he will even let a true hero run free, like we saw with Deku in chapter 78. It's also implied that Spinner has a sense of morality when it comes to innocent civilians, trying to not get them involved with their own affairs, which we see by how terrified he appeared to be upon hearing Shigaraki's goals to destroy the world rather than reshape it like he had hoped. Spinner, like a lot of the League of Villains members, was inspired by Stain and joined them to reform the world. As mentioned by Mr. Compress in chapter 294, he is Shigaraki's most devoted follower. This is why he can tell when All For One possesses Shigaraki's body, and the world of destruction that All For One seeks isn't what he wishes for. Spinner does a lot for the psychological exploration of the League as a group, being the character that narrates their moments, logs every member's thoughts and morals while making his own very clear. He is far from powerful and is ranked lower on the threat list than every other League member talked about in this video, but seeing how he analyses the path the League is on makes him indispensable. And that is all of the major members of the League of Villains explained. We made sure to go balls deep into the characters and what drove them to join in the first place, as well as how the League has changed them, as well as their quirks. Make sure you get in the comment section down below and let us know who your favourite member of the League of Villains is. Also be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, and make sure to hit that notification bell. Also make sure to check out our merch in the description below as well as all of our socials. But with that out the way, we'll be seeing you guys next time.